While you're listening to this, I'd love for you to think about if any of this resonates with maybe what you've seen at previous workplaces or maybe even where you work at the moment. Okay, across the top there, we see the kind of four operations every kind of agency or consultancy needs to undertake. You need to quote your work, right? Create your estimates. You need to schedule your work. You need to track your project, your time, your expenses, your purchases, your tasks. You need to invoice, and maybe there's a bucket missing. You need to report on your projects and your business overall. Like a lot of young agencies, I shouldn't say young, but maybe not super mature agencies, many years ago, my previous agency was using a huge assortment of tools, multiple harvest instances. Don't ask me why. We had loads of Google Sheets that were just creating chaos, and everyone was managing projects, whether it's in their notebook, in Asana, or Apple Notes, whatever it is. It was just like completely all over the place. I mean, some of those logos that you see on screen or other things that you might be using, they're not bad tools in themselves. In fact, some of them might be what we call like best in class for what they do in particular. And a lot of us, when we look at these tools and when we've searched for them and think we're selecting some of the best, what we think is that we're going to get insights, right? But the result of having kind of an array of tools for all this kind of stuff is that this ends up being the reality. You end up having dozens of spreadsheets and manual processes to move that information from one system to the next. Or maybe you try to use Zapier or APIs to try to get stuff to flow, but there's limitations in that kind of stuff as well. How much Zapier can access and read and write, and there's limitations, right? So there's the breakdown of these kind of data flows, which means it's not automated, right? And we talk about automation a lot. And so this is not automated. So I'm going to quickly highlight three of the key disconnects that kind of take place. The first is when you're estimating somewhere here, maybe in a spreadsheet or Harvest or whatever, and you're tracking your projects somewhere else, Asana or wherever it might be. You end up manually needing to track what you've done, how much time you've burned against what you've quoted. Okay. And the reality is that we're all busy. So when those two things are disconnected, you end up not updating your project tracker very often. You might forget to add some expenses and supplier costs and stuff like that. So there's a massive disconnect. And you end up very likely over servicing or not having visibility on that until it's too late, right? So if the budget tracking isn't in the same place as where your project is being tracked, it's just super easy to ignore and less frequently done. The next big disconnect is when you're scheduling somewhere, whether it's in Google Sheets or Avasa or wherever, and you're tracking your project somewhere else, okay? And the result of that is, first of all, we know that our timelines are constantly changing, right? There's never a day that your project, what you said at the beginning, doesn't need to change on a weekly basis, potentially. So if you're planning all your resources here, tracking your project there, when those changes happen to the timeline, there's a massive disconnect. It doesn't keep up with what's happening in reality or what needs to happen. So you lose the visibility on whether your team is now going to have a huge amount of time with nothing to do, or suddenly things have gotten so crunched that everyone's going to be overworked, right? So you just don't know what the workload is going to be like. And the last one is between kind of tracking your project and invoicing. And this one's super dangerous. I think we've all probably been in situations where things have fallen through the gaps and not been invoiced. And it's just like panic when you realize that you've forgotten something that should have been invoiced 4 months ago or something. So a manual billing process means that it's just super laborious to keep on top of what should be invoiced by how much and what was left to invoice. I was working with a client last year that was using their HubSpot sales pipeline to track what they needed to invoice. So they would sit around HubSpot once a week, try to look at their sales stages and try to work out what had been invoiced by how much. So if any of you used a CRM platform like HubSpot, it is not designed for invoice tracking. Super dangerous. That was obviously quite horrific when I heard that. And obviously they were constantly losing track of what needed to be invoiced. So those are some of the challenges when you have all these kind of tools working in silos, but good news, there is a better way. And of course, we're talking today about simplifying your tech stack, leveling up your maturity. So I wanted to talk to you about how that is done in a platform, a professional services automation platform, okay? So the way I think about this is that when you put data into this platform, it gets reused throughout the system. So you maybe build a budget or a quote, And that turns into your project. It turns into your resourcing plan. It turns into your invoices. So you're not copying, exporting, and manually trying to set up an invoice. It exists because that information was already entered into the system. Stuff is just available where you need it. So in a platform like Scoro, it covers that end to end from estimating, creating your quotes, managing your pipeline through to resourcing, scheduling, time sheeting, time tracking in various ways, project tracking. So again, your tasks and your budgets, right through to billing and business level reporting. I see it like an operating system for your business, right? So this is a platform that you use to run your business. So you can plug in your third-party tools like your accounting platform. So if you use QuickBooks, Sage, or Xero, two-way data sync. If you are mature enough to be using a dedicated CRM like HubSpot, Salesforce, or Pipedrive, it can synchronize data two ways. If you're using something like Bamboo HR to manage your team's time off and all that kind of stuff, it can sync your annual leave. So the system knows that your colleagues in design or whoever it might be is off. And so you can make resource plans that way. And of course, through the API, you can do loads of custom stuff. Through Zapier, you can connect additional tools. And there's lots of other native integrations as well.